And I would, it's really a pleasure for me to introduce Maureen, Dr. Maureen McCue, that is.
You can call me Dr.
I can call you Dr. McCue. Maureen has traveled and consulted and worked extensively as a physician and also as a researcher and peacemaker. She's the founding member, faculty, and former director of the University of Iowa Global Health Studies programs, as well as a founding board member for the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights. As an adjunct clinical professor in the colleges of public health and of liberal arts, Dr. McCue teaches a variety of health and human rights topics, including global health and climate change. She coordinates the Iowa chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility, with whom we are in cahoots with on several occasions throughout the year. We're going to be working with them around Earth Day, with this Family Earth Day activity. We do the Fourth Fest Parade with them, which is great fun. And we also have been working with them at the Johnson County Fair, which has also been an interesting and fun experience. As the coordinator of the Iowa chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility, they are addressing the gravest threats to human health and survival, and specifically the threat of climate disruption and nuclear proliferation. Endeavors in each area have focused broadly on the human right to health within a sustainable, life-supporting environment. Dr. McCue lives in rural Johnson County, where she's been living off her land, producing and consuming her own food for almost 3 decades. So tonight, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Maureen McCue. She's going to stand up here so you can see her. She's going to be talking to us about climate change, the risk to health here, there, and everywhere.
Well, I am thankful that you invited me, but I am even more embarrassed that I don't seem to have brought my slides, despite having brought my stick.
Oh, good. Oh.
I've never done that before. all day I kept saying, you're going to have, is this really on?
It is on. I can kind of hear you.
Yeah, you can kind of hear me.
I can hear the. I can get closer.
Wow. I think as a doctor, that's unhealthy. Anyway, all day while I was thinking about, what I wanted to do today, plus what I wanted to do for my lecture for my class tomorrow, versus I'm leaving on Wednesday to go on a real vacation, I kept thinking, what kind of things does this really well-educated group really need to hear? What do we really need to talk about? I had this great opening slide. In fact, I had a lot of good slides. Now I'm going to have to figure out where to use this lecture that I didn't bring.
You can post them to our website if you want.
Yeah, we could do that. I usually put everything in lectures, i.e. because I'm out lecturing. Can I look just 1 second more? What I did, Mary Beth had asked me if I would bring a couple of these little Think Green, a simple guide, along, and I don't know that I printed enough. I had no idea how many of you would show up. And I tried to put one little picture of a cow in it, because the last time I had this out and one of the grannies was there, they said, oh, but this website doesn't have anything about our agriculture system and how it affects climate. And you know what? I went back and I looked, and there are not very many that really do emphasize. You can either look at climate change and food, but you can't look at climate change in general and find much that looks at food. It seems that many of the people who put these graphical things together kind of focus on one or the other. I certainly didn't bring enough of these guys, but I also think part of the whole health picture, I didn't know if any of the vets would be here, has to do with the role of militarism and climate, which is another thing that people often don't put together. If you're going to talk about the effect of climate on our health, I think we do need to recognize some of the bigger problems with what's driving climate change. So I just put together a few of these. I worked with some students on both of these, in fact. And what I like about the little one that you have is that we actually interviewed a number of children, so talking about books for children, talking about ideas for children. I think getting children engaged in the whole picture is part of the health of our future, because unfortunately, being here at the Senior Center, we are not going to be the ones who are going to see the worst of the effects, but it's our children and our grandchildren. And then the other thing that I brought along for show and tell, and then I will look at one more time quickly under lectures and see if I did put it there. I wanted to let you know that in cahoots with the grannies, as Mary Beth says, we are working on a kind of a nature play date or a Nature Connect event that's being oriented to both families, adults, and children, or individuals, as the case may be, to kind of get people engaged with some of the beautiful outdoors that we still have here in Iowa in limited quantity, but nevertheless in great profusion out at Kent Park. So I just brought a couple of these as well. You can kind of pass them around. A couple of you who are going to post them somewhere can take one. The rest of you who just want to know about it, just you can glance at it and pass them out, because I only made about 5 of them, I think. I did plan to get here before 6. I did manage to run out of gas and hit every stoplight. So you can ask questions about that idea of the Kent Park event while I look one last time to see if my slides are here somewhere.
So we talked a little bit about that, Maureen, before you came, but I do want to say I've not seen it, but a number of the events will be at the Conservation Center, the brand new educational center at Kent Park. So that will sort of be the hub for all the activities. There'll be hikes and an interesting concept of doing hikes with yoga at the end, or yoga in the middle, or meditation somewhere along the hike or something. So.
Well, we're actually working it out really specifically. We're going to do nature hikes. They'll take off every half hour to 45 minutes, either age appropriate 9 and under if you're a real wiggler, or 10 and above if you can listen. And sometimes I feel like the 9 and under. But anyway, they'll end up at the site where the yoga is happening. So if you want to just do yoga, you can go to the Yoga in the Park site at the time indicated. But if you want to go on the hike and then do the yoga, you can do that. They're coordinated. So I am embarrassed to say, I honest to God cannot find what I did with them. So I wish I could find a pretty picture from one of my other lectures, but I'm too nervous to do that. So I'll just talk. So anyway, I started out with saying climate change is sickening, and I had this great image of the earth sweating and saying, I feel sick, and a person in bed saying, me too, which is really what's happening. We have to remember our health depends on the health of the planet, and there's just no two ways around it. And what the next picture I had was a great picture of a bunch of folks with a question mark, and then all sorts of people looking like workers, like academics, etc., asking really who's really in the audience. I know you're mostly members of the Senior Center, but I don't know whether or not, other than I know Miriam and Mary Beth have been doing a lot of work on climate, and Becky perhaps. But I don't know what other people come to this as. Is it, I know there are a lot of people saying there's still debate. There's other people saying it's caused by God. And I'm sure there's still other things. So are there people in here that are still concerned about the debate about whether or not climate change is happening? You can raise your hand, I won't tell because they won't turn their back.
I believe that there is climate change, but
I was just visiting my daughter in Keosauqua, and she doesn't believe it at all. And I don't know whether it's, I don't know if there's any Republican, I don't know whether it's a Republican thing or not, but she is a very staunch Republican, and we'll let it go at that. But I don't know how you can believe that there isn't. And her answer to me was, well, this is just part of a cycle. This happens all the time, and this is just another cycle.
Yeah, it has happened over the millions of years, or in fact the billions of years that Earth has been here. That is not a question. The climate has changed. We know we've had hotter and we know we've had cooler. The point is that human civilization is right around 10,000 years old. And human civilization evolved. It evolved because we could predict the foods we could grow and eat. And we could actually settle somewhere because we knew how to get food, because plants and animals evolved in a given temperature. And it's been relatively stable over that period of time. And so you can just say, yes, it has changed, but not very much in 10,000 years. And that's the point. And people often forget that little point, that we are where we are because we can grow food, because we can keep ourselves healthy within a predictable climate. That doesn't mean weather doesn't change, and there aren't ups and downs, but the climate is predictable patterning that allows us to grow food, basically. And a lot of other questions that people have are, so what can be done? So maybe toward the end we'll kind of go to that. What can be done about your daughter? I'm not 100% certain. Oh, I hope not.
Well, I think your comment is right on target with what we heard from the legislators that participated in the Friday morning, or the Saturday morning forum that the League of Women Voters had last Saturday. Because their comment was that there are Republican legislators who will stand on the floor and outright deny that there is any such thing as climate change. And so they're not interested in talking about it, debating it, or even discussing any bills that relate to it, which is quite a concern, much more than just your daughter.
They don't want judges, they don't want restrictions on any corporations out there. I mean, these things are all interconnected. But just to give a few details, as of 2014, 67% of U.S. electricity still came from fossil fuels. And this is why we are working on something called the Clean Power Plan, which only addresses electricity for the most part in its plan, so that people cut their use of electricity because so much of it is still coming from fossil fuels. Globally, however, 80% of electricity still comes from fossil fuels. So it is a big, big problem out there. And on the flip side of that, which is sometimes used by Republicans or any others who are in support of the fossil fuel industry, is that 1.3 billion people still lack access to electricity, and they seek it. And so the quick and easy answer always is, so those Indians need that coal. They need that petroleum. Because who are we to say they can't have energy? So those are some really sticky parts of the picture. But for anybody who believes in any kind of science, hot is the new normal. The graphs just keep coming out. They pump them out every year. And I'm afraid you can't really see my little picture. That was my reminder. But perhaps you could tell the blue lines and the red lines. They happen to do with the highs and the lows in recent years. And all the reds are all, the last 25 years. It just every year goes up higher and higher and higher. And January of this year is already on record as the hottest January. And in fact, just off the presses today, for those of you who follow the weather news, is that this is the first January to have actually hit more than 2 degrees above normal in terms of all the recorded history. So we're heading off to that 2 degrees warming that we've been hearing about. And overall, we still haven't quite hit 1. We're talking Celsius here. And we're already seeing an increase in storms. We do know that the Greenland ice sheets are starting to melt. We do know that sea levels are rising. We do know 2015 was the hottest year on record and the 20 warmest years in recorded history, which of course doesn't go back, to the time of the dinosaurs, but we didn't have recordings then. It is really the hottest. It just continues to get hotter since the last couple of decades. So the other thing that people like to get tied up in knots about is it global warming or is it climate change? Yes. Well, there is a difference. The Earth is warming, and as a result of the warming, the weather, climate patterns are changing. So the climate is subservient to the temperature of the globe as a whole. So the globe is warming, it is absorbing the heat from the CO2, and as a result, our weather patterns are changing. And for a while there, I've actually been talking about climate and health for about 20 years, and there was a time when you were only supposed to say global warming, and then there was a time you were only supposed to say climate change because somebody did some kind of survey and found out what words resonate more, and at this point it's like, yeah, choose your poison, it's happening.
And crisis, aren't we now supposed to say climate crisis?
Yes, yeah, there are all these word mavens out there. Yes, now it is a crisis. It is definitely a crisis. You can also call it climate weirding. You can call it climate chaos. All of these things are happening, and so, to some degree, I actually prefer the term climate chaos, because we really don't know from day to day. When you say global warming, people have this sense that it's just getting a little warmer each year and will adjust each year. But the problem is it's leaping all over the place and making it very hard for either the plants, the animals, or us to know exactly what to do. It's quite chaotic. And what we do know, and you can tell your daughter, there are pretty good records now showing how many people are actually dying as a result of these changes. For those of you who remember 2003, I happen to have had a daughter who was pregnant in Switzerland at the time, and I would get these letters from her saying, "Mom, I don't know what to do." The Swiss don't use a whole lot of air conditioning. They have really heavy old buildings that are well insulated, either winter or summer. She was, as a pregnant young woman, sleeping on the kitchen tile floor because it was the only place she could get some relief from the heat. They calculated they had, during the heat wave in Europe, about 30,000 deaths. We heard about it somewhat because all of the mortuaries were overrun. They didn't know what to do with all these bodies coming in, because heat is very deadly for many members of society, particularly for elders or people with chronic illness. Now, some might, roll their eyes and say, well, these people might have died anyway. Well, yes, they would have eventually, but not all at the same time. We're all going to die sometime. But it's the idea that you keep records, and the Europeans keep really good records of how many people generally die in certain seasons, certain months. And what they saw was this huge spike during the heat wave. And then the spike stayed up because some of the people who got sick, who were somewhat debilitated, developed pneumonias and heart attacks and things like that. And they were kept alive for a certain period of time after the heat wave abated, but then they had been so weakened so that depending on which epidemiologic reporter you read, the death toll from that particular heat wave in across much of Europe that year is reported up to as many as 50,000 people, one heat wave. So that is in a region of the world that is as advanced, as wealthy, as well managed as any. In fact, it is the better managed part of the world. In 2010, I don't know if you followed the Russian heat wave, but about 55,000 were reported to have died as a result of that. The sorts of reports we got in our media had to do with the ones who died because they drank too much vodka and went swimming. Everybody was at the beaches because they didn't know where to go because of the heat, and unfortunately they drank too much vodka before they got in the water. And so some of the deaths were drowning, but secondary to the heat wave. And then in May of just last year, less than a year ago, the sustained heat wave in India, recording the highest temperatures ever since '95 anyway, caused the death of about 2,500 people in multiple regions across India. The sad thing about India is that people don't have decent housing. They didn't have anywhere to go, and they had nowhere to cool off. And so this is part of that picture of they also need the resources to be able to respond to things like heat waves. And it doesn't have so many deaths associated with it, but I did want to mention just last month, Cyclone Winston. Who heard about Cyclone Winston? Did you? Do you want to say something, Becky?
No, I just read about it a little bit today, so it was in the Philippines, right?
Well, it was in the South Pacific.
South Pacific.
Yeah. It was the first Category 5 tropical cyclone ever to hit Fiji. And it was the strongest tropical cyclone on record in the Southern Hemisphere, with maximum winds up at 185 miles per hour. Now, fortunately, it didn't have as many deaths as some other extreme storms, simply because it's a small population dispersed over the land that it covered. So only about 50 people died in that particular but extreme event that had never been seen there. So I'm imagining as storms move closer into Australia and places like that where you have denser populations, we may see a different story in coming years. So the point about global warming is that it isn't just an increase in warmer weather, but it's an increase in bizarre weather, and particularly in altered rainfall patterns. And you can hardly live in Iowa without having noticed a little bit about altered rainfall patterns. And, you know, between, the 3 500-year floods we had from 93 and 2014, 2015, it's hard to forget 2008, but I was also caught in 1993. For those of you who lived here, we had a nasty bit of rain then. And not only, you know, are we seeing more rain, we're seeing less rain in other places. So where we have a good amount of rain, we get more rain. Where we don't have enough rain, we get less rain. So droughts are getting worse. And while heat is the most deadly aspect of the changing climate in terms of fast onset of mortality, droughts are a much more lethal form of the changing climate because they affect larger populations over longer periods of time. It's called famine and starvation. And we're seeing some of that in places like South Sudan now. They don't just happen by themselves. They happen in conjunction with other political, economic problems like we saw in Syria, which is why I did bring climate change and conflict, because what we have in Sudan is a history for several decades of on again, off again civil war, so they don't get the kind of infrastructure, they don't get the kind of healthcare and education that the population needs to stabilize. And then on top of that, you keep getting these droughts where people have a very hard time accessing adequate food. So you have hungry people, and hungry people get angry, just like they did in Syria. So we had a number of farmers affected by the drought there kept asking for assistance, kept turning to the government for assistance that didn't come, moving into cities, exacerbating pre-existing tensions, and the rest you all know is history. And then meanwhile, we're getting just degradation of our ecosystem overall. The plants, the animals, the insects, they're getting out of sync with one another. Those that can are migrating up or migrating north. Those that are already at the peak of their range are just dying off. And so we're going through, as what's her name, Colbert says, the Sixth Extinction, where we're just seeing the loss of many of the animals and the members of our diverse biosphere, all of whom interact with one another and all of whom support one another. So climate change is not just affecting our health, it's affecting the health of all of the living creatures around us, all of us who evolved together. And so I had all these lovely pictures you could look at of drought and fire and flood, but you know what they look like. And from this clean power plant perspective, thinking about all of that electricity, is there somebody out there?
Checking out your voice.
To remind you that while we're burning these fossil fuels, we're not just talking about the climate change that's evolving, we're talking about immediate impacts. So coal puts out a lot of particulate matter, puts out a lot of nitrous oxides and sulfur oxides and mercury and lead and the list of about 85 different chemicals and compounds that come out of burning it. And it's all itself related to premature death because of these exposures. It's associated with heart attacks. It's associated with asthma attacks. It's associated with lots of money spent in the emergency room by children and adults. It's associated with lost work days. So the point being that we may want to consider our electricity sources not only because of something that's going to happen in the future, but something that would happen immediately in our neighborhoods. And all these costs are going up. So then I had this really nice, cute little picture. I'm sorry, it was an illustrated talk. A shortcut on all the health impacts. I mean, we could really spend a lot of time. In fact, I spend an entire semester talking about the health impacts, which is why I brought the orange book. Where'd it go? Oh, here. If you're really interested in the research on the health impacts, this book by Barry Levy and Jonathan Patz just came out last year, and it reviews in very fine print, which my students hate, all of the literature out there on the health effects of a changing climate. Jonathan Patz, he's from Wisconsin. He's been talking on climate change and health forever, and he's one of the most optimistic people you'll ever meet, next to Jerry Schnorr, who can find the silver lining in the picture no matter what. And so basically what Jonathan does is he talks a lot about how the very things that will keep you healthier should keep the environment healthier, like getting out in your bikes when you can instead of taking your car or taking public transit or walking, that sort of thing. And when it comes to diet, obviously, far less meat and more fruits and vegetables. All of these things have immediate health benefits if you do the right thing. And then my next little slide was to say, I can't go over all of the health impacts, but the PSR website, which you can get to easy enough, psr.org, and go to the environment resources. And we have all sorts of sort of 1 and 2 and 3 page handouts on climate change and health with regard to effects of heat, water impacts. I do want to mention with flooding, you know what happens in cities with poor infrastructure, i.e. many U.S. cities. When you get flooding, you get this water that comes out of our sewers. Because it drains into the sewer system, and then when they get overloaded, it comes back up. And so that is very contaminated water. we can list lots of health implications of getting your sewer water mixed in with general water and exposure when people are trying to move out of flooded homes and flooded areas and moving to higher ground. Hi. Another area, of course, is insect-borne diseases. And so people right now are talking about yet another interesting insect. Who knows what I'm thinking about? Zika, yeah. So when we first started talking about climate and health, we talked a lot about mosquitoes because a whole lot of diseases are borne by mosquitoes. And when we're talking about heat, mosquitoes, they like to reproduce more rapidly, they like to bite more rapidly, and they spread. So for many parts of the world, I teach global health actually, we're worried about malaria. So if those mosquitoes are biting more often, if they're moving into higher regions, if they affect women and children primarily, what is going to be the picture of malaria as time goes on? Similarly for dengue. We do have dengue in the Western Hemisphere. Dengue is called bone break fever. It's very painful, often misdiagnosed as malaria in areas where you have both. Malaria and bone break fever, dengue, make you want to die. If you've ever taken care of anybody, you get excruciating headaches, body aches, and people think they're going to die. With malaria, you can just keep getting it over and over if you live in a malarious area. With dengue, if you get it more than a few times, you can sometimes get what's called dengue hemorrhagic fever, which is quite deadly. So these are not simple illnesses, but they are mosquito-borne illnesses. A couple of years ago, we began hearing about chikungunya, which had moved into the Western Hemisphere. It has that funny name, but it doesn't feel like fun when you have it. It's another one of those diseases that makes you feel miserable. It doesn't kill you like malaria and dengue do, but it makes you feel pretty miserable. And then we get to Zika, which is really a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. It follows actually Ebola, in terms of everybody being somewhat concerned. It reminds us that we have a weak public health system to address changing infectious disease pictures. So part of the climate change issue is a changing infectious disease picture, and Zika should be a real wake-up. For all of these diseases, whether we're talking about heat impacts, polluted water impacts, insect-borne disease impacts, it's children and elders and babies who are most vulnerable, followed by pregnant women, which is what we're learning with Zika. And then we can't forget outdoor workers. Around the world, many, many people are working outdoors, not to mention farmers and farm workers, but construction workers, road workers of all sorts. So these are people also. You can't just talk about climate change and health without thinking about who is most at risk, and there are different risks for different populations. And the other thing, of course, is that our plants and animals suffer too. We heard, in our heat waves here, we lost a lot of chickens and turkeys and cows. What happens, the corn that is fed to them, it grows a toxin called aflatoxin. When it dries, it splits and the fungus moves in. And aflatoxin is very deadly to humans. It's not as deadly to cows, so they can give a little bit more of it to them, but at some point it begins to kill them off also. And my best picture, the one that was supposed to wake you up when you got sort of sleepy because it's that time of the day, was I have a great picture of beer and wine. If nothing else bothers you, remember your beer and your wine also are agriculturally related, right? So hops. Hops are having some difficulty growing in a warming climate. They're only grown in a few small areas of the world. And so hops are suffering. It affects the flavors and the types of hops available. And similarly, a warming and an unpredictable climate affects those grapes for wine. So if nothing else, I always figure you can talk about that. nothing controversial there.
College students, right?
Huh?
I can tell you lecture to college students, right?
Yeah, they start to, nod off, but you mentioned beer in there. I have to come up sometimes with sports analogies too. It's hard to be overheated and wear all those equipment that the football players wear. But we can't talk about a changing climate without talking a little bit, at least a smidge, about fracking and natural gas. All greenhouse gases are not equivalent. Fracking involves the release of methane into the environment. Methane's global warming potential is much greater than CO2. It's in the atmosphere a shorter amount of time, but it is a very powerful greenhouse gas. Similarly, nitrous oxide released in fertilizers is also very much more powerful. So, we worry maybe is fracking causing earthquakes and things like that in Oklahoma, but we're also very concerned about the release of the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with it. When it's burned in the power plant that switched from coal to natural gas, it releases less CO2. The problem is the methane en route along its life cycle. And then, so we have to say some good news. And the good news is that Iowa is just really fantastic about wind energy. As you know already, we produce about 28.5% of our electric energy is coming from wind, which is on a per capita basis very good for this state. And we've only just begun. We have a lot more potential out there, but what we need is a new grid. Landowners get payments for leasing their land. We have several manufacturers making those turbines. We have about $10 billion in capital investment in wind energy here. We have about 3,200 utility scale turbines across Iowa as of last year. So we're doing fantastic, and we could do a whole lot more. And then we also have solar potential. We've hardly hit our solar potential in this state. In Iowa, we are further south than Germany, and Germany gets a very large percentage of its electric energy and battery storage power from solar power, and we could do at least as good as Germany, if not more so. We need to continue to promote the use and the installation of solar, whether it's on individual homes, in municipalities, churches, what have you. We could do a whole lot better job. And fossil fuel is going down in Europe as a result of their investment in alternative energy, and we could certainly do that. And last but not least, we should also remember energy efficiency, redoing of homes and dwellings in general is all the energy we don't need to use. So the benefits are that we are not spending money on the electricity, we're not spending money on our health because of the burning of fossil fuels, and a lot more could be done all around every community in terms of energy efficiency. So there are lots of ways we can move forward. I know people in here are talking about also reducing their carbon footprint by changing their housing circumstances. We can make this a much more walkable city. We can do a lot more with public transit and so on. So there are solutions. We just have to have the political will and the oomph to do them. And we have to get rid of those enablers of doom, of course, the ones who put all this fossil fuel here. The petroleum products didn't move here on their own. They had enablers. And this is a man-made problem. It is a problem we can solve. We can't be fooled by, the green energy lookalikes that fight absolutely every bill that comes out trying to promote green energy, but really look at the ways that we can improve our health both currently and in future by going with clean energy alternatives. And when people start talking about homeland security, I hope you start thinking about public health. security is our health, security is our food, security is our future. We really have to put the risks to all of these, our health, our food, our future, against what are the needs for the billions and billions and trillions of dollars that we're spending on military, which in many ways is, as I said, exacerbating the problem, not resolving it. And I had a real cute picture of my grandkids up there because they're one of my motivators, but you just have to believe me, they're the cutest grandchildren. Of course.
How many do you have now?
Three. I only put 2 up there. I didn't want to make a big crowd.
Yeah.
No, they're here in this country now. Yeah, they got born. They learned their French. Now they're speaking English like they never spoke French. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm willing to talk and get you to talk to each other, because probably you have as many answers as I have, if not more. So that's my short and sweet and slideless presentation on all the health implications you can possibly imagine in climate change. Questions, comments, concerns? Miriam, talk about vulnerable indigenous peoples, perhaps.
Yes.
Talk about indigenous peoples as protectors of the land and biodiversity.
Well, say a few words about the Southern Hemisphere being at greater risk than the Northern Hemisphere because of climate change and the international implications of that and responsibilities that we should be stepping up to.
Well, anywhere within, the equator and regions north and south where there's very little development is part of the problem. We have been raping and taking a lot of the materials from particularly countries in Central America, South America, and Africa, yes. And we have really lived off of the wealth of the resources from these parts of the world. And so while we're able to get the minerals and the petroleum and the basic resources, the wood, the fish, you name it, the cows and the soy in Brazil, etc. Those countries haven't built the kinds of protections that they need, so their level of deforestation, their level of environmental degradation is even worse. And so in many ways they're suffering more so, and that's why we see a lot of these tropical diseases, insect-borne diseases, more in the south than we see here, because we have the screens, we have the doors, we have the resources to protect ourselves, whereas in many other parts of the world, the largesse of which we are living on, they don't have those same protections. Is that what you're referring to? And so anywhere where indigenous peoples live right now, there's a lot of effort to bring to people's attention the fact that they would like to be able to maintain their rivers and waterways, to maintain their woods, maintain their fisheries, things like that, that hold our climate together, hold our environment together. So they're really at the front lines of much of the work on climate and health. Yeah, sorry.
Our grandson is in Brazil for a little over a month. And he has seen these farms that are just, I don't know, tens of thousands of acres where they're growing sugar cane. And the soil is yellow and very poor, and they just fertilize and fertilize and fertilize and fertilize. And I would guess that land probably has not always been in, maybe it was forested, I don't know, but the whole thing just sounds awful.
Yeah, well, go out and look sometimes at what's happening to our soil here as well. I mean, the idea that
the other thing was he had to take all these medicines and has to, against malaria and Zika and whatever. And these workers, are constantly being exposed to those if they don't take all those medicines all the time.
Yeah, no, I think you're talking about the confluence of all aspects. We have the workers, we have the loss of the soil, we have the loss of the biodiversity, and then meanwhile up here we're all worrying about obesity because we're eating all the empty calories that are coming out of the sugarcane fields. Yeah, it's, we really have to rethink everything because it is all interconnected. It is hard to pull one thread without the whole thing kind of unraveling. But you begin to understand why, you know, the insect invasions are heavier in places where you no longer have forests, where you no longer have any of the natural interactions, you know. And insects are coming after people because they've lost other hosts that they might have otherwise been, you know, supping on, so to speak. You know, so all of these things are definitely interconnected, and sugarcane and soy and other products that we are really using a lot in this country are being produced at the risk of the local peoples in many other countries.
Is that the result of some of the Monsanto problem?
Well, the sugarcane in particular, since that's what she brought up, it preceded Monsanto by a long shot. I mean, the problems in Brazil and the sugarcane workers are prior to, but I'm sure not in any way helped by Monsanto. Monsanto has really been such a powerful, horrible, no good, very bad actor since World War II, and we've been eating sugar since before World War II. Yeah.
Can you identify one climate change that is the biggest health risk, say for people in Iowa or people in general? Is it fossil fuels? Is it the air quality? Is it the water? Is it?
Yeah. All of the above. Yeah, all of Iowa's surface water is imperiled. You know, you can't go swim in it, you can't drink it, you know, it is all imperiled. And so it costs us a bit to clean it up and to be able to work with it. We are losing our soil across the state, and part of that is due to all the pesticides. You can't kill living organisms and expect them to do their job. Soil is a living organism, and they just keep dumping poisons on it, which is, you know, probably why the sugarcane soil looks so peculiar as well, because it's not real soil anymore after decades of putting these poisons on it. The changing climate is much worse for much of the rest of the world than it is here. I think that's also what Maureen was trying to get at. But if you look, I had this great map, which you can't at all picture from this little piece here. But there's these map makers, and then there's one by KILN journalism called Carbon Maps, and it shows you, you know, just the way the world looks in normal proportion. Then it shows you the poverty versus income, you know, in terms of how many people per land area are impoverished versus wealthy. And then it shows you kind of who's been putting out all of the CO2 or CO2 equivalents, i.e. methane and nitrogen, nitrogenous products and so on. And you know, so then it really distorts the US and Europe, and then it shows who's affected, who's really affected, and then you get a humongous India and Asian countries and a pretty good size Africa as well. So they're the ones being affected, and the US comes out real skinny. And we are worried. It isn't that it isn't happening here. It's just that on a relative scale, we're in a lot better shape because we do have air conditioning, because we do have decent buildings, because we do have halfway decent roadways and things we can get from point A to point B, and we have a pretty good food distribution system. So for us, if we live in Iowa and we have a really long hot summer, the heat is what kills people. But if you can get in and get cooled off, you're okay. Cooling centers, heat advisory days, all of these things help the vulnerable among us, little children, babies, and elders, you know, to get indoors. It doesn't help if you're a worker. So the question is, you know, who's most affected under what circumstances? You know, obviously, if you're living in a coastal area, like they did for Hurricane Sandy, or down where Katrina was, or parts of Florida, when you've got an extreme storm coming through, you know, everybody is at risk. But if you can get out because you have a car and you have roadways, you're less at risk. If you're an old person stuck in a nursing home that doesn't have transportation out, like they did in Katrina, you die. If you're a black impoverished family who doesn't have transportation, you can't get out, you die. If you have a bunch of little kids or a disabled brother or sister that you're trying to get out but you can't, you may die. And so who's at risk for what circumstances depends on both the circumstances and the person you're asking. So heat is the biggest killer, rapid. But then flooding or landslides, avalanches, if they come very quickly and you can't get out of the way, they can be deadly. It just depends on your circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah, I just read recently that there's some company in California that's using fracking water, the byproduct, to start to water like produce.
Well, that's a sickening thought. Yeah, this is really a problem. I mean, we're talking climate change, but you can talk about environmental pollution in the other side of your hand. Because this fracking water, they're using millions and millions of gallons of fresh water. They put it in these holding tanks or holding ponds, which may or may not leak, and then they try to reuse them, but you can only reuse that just so many times before it doesn't work. And then what are you going to do with it? Just like you can keep burning coal, and you can keep scrubbing and collecting, but that ash, it's always going to produce that ash. What are you going to do with it? And so people keep trying to figure out ways to use these really unhealthy products, and they put them on our food. Yes, they do that with coal too. Coal ash, it goes out on some of the fields some of the time. So we live on a finite planet. You can't keep making crap and expect it's going to somehow miraculously disappear. I don't know, I swear they have a colony on Mars or something that they're all going to and leave the rest of us behind. I know they make movies like that, but I feel like that some days.
And I think that's really counterproductive to make a movie which implies that you can just go to another planet.
I always think it implies they're gone. That's why they're doing it. I don't know. No, I agree. I mean, we can't escape it. We have a finite planet and we can't keep polluting it. And that's what people forget, as long as they're making money off of it and they're not feeling the effects, they can keep doing what they're doing. But eventually, it's going to catch up with them. They can't keep running. They can't hide. There are only so many places to go on the planet. Yeah.
Well, I've started to feel is the more immediate threat from climate change is ocean acidification.
Yeah.
Because not only if the plankton dies, that's our food chain gone.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one study by a French oceanographer that said all Arctic, everything in the Arctic could die by 2030, as far as the bottom of the food chain with the plankton. But besides the food chain, plankton also makes approximately half of our oxygen. And so if this die-off in the oceans happens over the next 2 or 3, 4 decades, living here in Iowa, our air could be rarefied of oxygen as if we were living up in the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, no, that is one of those scary things that people are looking at. There's more stuff going on in the ocean than we like to think about. Not only that, but there's a lot of methane at the bottom also that
Right.
people are worrying about that upwelling as the pH is changing and so on. And not only are the oceans being acidified because of all the CO2 that they're absorbing, but we have these huge dead zones now around all the continents because of all the crap we're putting into our surface waters that eventually empty into the ocean. So you look at the dead zone in the Gulf and it just keeps growing and growing. And most of the experts think that 50% of that is coming from Iowa because of our heavy use of pesticides and fertilizers. It's just killing off the water, killing off the ocean. But there are dead zones like that around all of the major continents. We're not the only ones. I mean, that's part of the problem, is we're all in this together, and we're all on this planet together. And like you say, if the oceans are affected, we'll feel it here in Iowa, even though otherwise I always say Iowa's the best place, invest in land, because they're going to be coming
I
in.
generally tell people that in 20 years they could be paying triple the price for sushi. And makes me stop and think, why was that?
Well, if you're a vegetarian, you don't even
True.
think about the price of sushi, but except that the kind with just the rice. Yeah.
So all this talk about all the stuff we're putting into our water, how can we convince farmers to use cover crops that would?
I think they're starting to go that way. How can we increase the rate of acceptance? But I was at a conference with a lot of farmers talking about soil, just several months ago, and they're getting concerned also because they're seeing it disappearing. And that's their money, that's their livelihood. And so they are starting to do some of those things. And the question is picking up the pace, getting the policies, getting the support that they need in this particular administration, where a lot of the tax breaks goes to industry, and then you have less and less money to do anything else. So you have to choose now between, are you going to clean up your waters or make your schools better? Because the money that was supposed to have been going to the schools is, now going to be diverted to water. So
There are programs too that are paying farmers basically to try these covers.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. We need to pick up the
So
pace.
the federal government is supporting them.
That's another election issue, how much money is going to be lost if our new administration isn't thoughtful about. Okay, you guys want to go home, right?
One more thing before you leave. We always give our speakers one of our bags that we make. We are trying to eliminate plastic bags in Iowa City. Plastic is a fossil fuel product.
It is indeed.
And it is polluting our oceans. I've read that by 2050, there's going to be more plastic than fish in the oceans. And plastic bags is just plastic bags are just a symptom. I mean, there's lots of other plastic too, but this is maybe one way to get people to realize how bad plastic is. So we like to, there's some different colors in there. You can pick whichever one you like the best. So, since
Well, I have to take a green one,
since we're not
obviously.
paying you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it.
And it's got a gusset.
These are really nice bags made out of upholstery fabric that was headed for the landfill, and one of our grannies saved it, so from the landfill.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night. I'm really sorry about this slide.
You know what, we wouldn't have known it if you didn't tell us.
Well, but I didn't know it either.